Okay, thank you for all for coming. It's my pleasure to introduce Laura Zahn, who is joining us today to tell us about publishing insight from an editor's perspective. So Laura, who I've known for a number of years, frequent participant in genomics conferences, attended Smith College, where she got a biology degree, and then she worked for a little bit at Brigham and Women's, where she worked on the nascent human genome project. She went to the University of Arizona for a PhD, which she got in ecology and evolutionary biology with a minor in genetics. She did postdoc work at Penn State, where she worked on the floral genome project. And then after that, she moved to Science Magazine, where she was an editor for 15 years. And then last year, she left and become the editor-in-chief of Cell Genomics, a newly launched journal. So anyway, I would also mention one of the things we have in common. She mentioned that she was a faculty brat, and I was too. So I think we always get an appreciation of publishing when you have to listen to your parents talk about people's dissertations and how they're written all the time. Anyway, but I'm eager to hear what she has to say, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. So I'm not going to attach the mic to myself, since I'll probably be here to move slides. I don't have any data or anything, but mostly I've written out what I'm going to be saying. So if you really have to phase out, you can read the slides. But I'm taking my years of editorial experience and I'm giving it all to you. And there's sort of twofold. First of all, it's good for your careers. Doesn't matter which journal you're going to, but it also makes my life a lot easier to explain what, as an editor, I'm looking for from authors and reviewers and such. This talk is mostly directed at junior people who don't have a lot of experience in publishing, although I've heard from more experienced and senior faculty that they learned something from it. So hopefully it's useful. Is this moving? Uh-oh. There we go. Okay. So I'm the editor-in-chief of Cell Genomics, which is a new journal from Cell Press. So there was another editor-in-chief who sort of got the journal started. It started publishing in October 2021, and they left in January of 2022. And I was brought in and assumed the helm in April of 2022. So I've been there about a year. There have been some changes in the journal since I've come, but the goal is that Cell Genomics is a gold open access journal, and we hope to be cutting edge. We're supposed to be one tier down from Cell. I'm hoping at some point maybe we'll challenge Cell for the best genomics papers. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about sort of Cell Press as well, because we interact a lot with other journals. But genomics for me is a very encompassing field. And right now, about 90% of life sciences start with some sort of genetics or genomic information. So basically, if you do something with DNA, RNA, even proteomics, we are the home for the genome, and we would love to see your work. People always want to know, is my field of interest to you? Yes. I'm not going to say that this field is boring and I don't want to see papers from it. I might say your paper is not quite what we're looking for, but we are really interested in the broad swath of work that's being done that's going to be of interest to people in the genomics community. Some of the top ones we're looking for are things like cancer genomics, single cell genomics, microbiome, evolutionary genomics, population, genome structure, functional analyses, things like high throughput screens. Basically, if you're looking at how things work at the genome level, we are going to be interested in it. And this is all on our homepage too. So Elizabeth just told you a little bit about my education and career trajectory. So I'm an evolutionary geneticist by training. I think very much from the genotype all the way to the phenotype and everything that comes in between. I think a lot about the selection and how the environment works on things. Which sometimes people in the more medical field don't necessarily think about those aspects, but it's something I'm very interested in personally. So my research was primarily on plant development, genes involved in making a flower and what allows for them to reproduce. At the end of my postdoc, I saw an ad at the back of the Science Magazine, back when you actually read the hard copy. And it had a lot of different things. And as a very multidisciplinary person, it seemed to be a good fit. So I wrote up a cover letter, I sent it in, and they liked the fact I was a geneticist, and they hired me to be the evolution editor. Well, 6 months after I got there, we suddenly had an explosion in genomes being submitted to the journal. And the editor who was in charge of those had just been promoted and didn't have the time to sort of handle all those papers. So I moved into that space. And so I developed a lot of the genomics for science and kind of grew the field. And it suits me well now to be the editor of my own journal that is solely genomics focused. So it works in terms of the scope of the field. So what is it an editor does? Not a lot of people understand. I certainly didn't before I took the job. One of the big ones is read. Unless I'm at a visit like this, and even sometimes when I am, I will read between 5 and 20 manuscripts a day. I read them at different levels. Some of them are going to be more in depth, and I really spend hours on them. And this is a paper I'm getting ready to accept, and I need to make sure that all the figures are called out appropriately, that they're in order, that the paper is legible, that the data are properly being described, that the statistics are there. And then there's sort of the initial assessment where I'm just kind of looking at, am I interested in this paper? Is this something I probably want to review? And just kind of skimming through it fairly quickly to just get a sense of what it's about and deciding if I'm interested in putting more time into it. As the editor, I will arrange for review. I select the reviewers, I assess reviews, and I make the decisions about whether or not your paper is going to get revised or not. I also make the decision about whether or not it goes to review. I also work with you on the final formatting. Sometimes I will fully edit your paper. Sometimes I will just give some suggestions, like there are a lot of run-on sentences here. Please keep an eye out and break them up. Make sure you consider readability. I do a lot of outreach to solicit manuscripts, visit universities or go to meetings. I recruit commentary for my journal. This is a new part of my job. We have perspectives, we have comments, we have letters in cell genomics. I do a degree of travel, whether I attend meetings or I go to an institution. And the other thing I have to do is not just read stuff at Cell Press, but I have to read what else is out there. What are the competing journals publishing? Where is the field? Where is the leading edge? So that I can make sure that I'm targeting appropriately the papers that are coming into my journal. So one thing I will say is there are a lot of jobs right now in editorial careers, especially at large publishing houses. Probably the best thing is that I get to talk to scientists and hear about really the top science that's going on across the world. It's so much fun. I love hearing about all the different projects people are working on. I've enjoyed the opportunities to travel. I get to meet the top researchers in the field. My colleagues overall have been great over the years. And I do have a degree of flexibility in my job. I've been telecommuting now for 12 years, so before it was cool post-COVID. I'm not an expert in everything. Jack of all trades, master of none. I do have to reject a lot of papers. They may be very good papers, but I only have so much time and so much space in my journals. Sometimes people think you've made the wrong decision then and might tell you in not so polite terms. I have a rather unpredictable schedule. I might think that today I'm going to do the top 3 things on my to-do list, and then I find out that there's a major issue in production and I have to spend the time, making sure the figures are correct or something like that, because they sent in a copyrighted figure and we can't use that in the paper, something like that. I have had very few, fortunately, in my career, but every once in a while there's the case of fraud, plagiarism. We'll call it authors behaving badly. It does happen. It's not fun to deal with. So now you know what it is that happens sort of behind the desk. What do you do if you're thinking about, I have some data, I'd like to write it into a paper and I'd like to get it published in a journal. One of the first things you need to do is identify your target journal. Where are the key references that I've been using to develop this research? Who is my target audience? Am I looking at specialists in the field? So it's a paper on diabetes. Do I want to go to a diabetes journal, or is this something that has implications beyond just diabetes in terms of the genetics? What is the level of advance? would it look out of place if I were to target this journal? Would it be too high, too low in terms of the amount of data and where the data sits in terms of our understanding of the field? There are general journals. Cell genomics is sort of on that border. It's a specialty journal in the sense that it's genomics focused, but it is sort of a general journal given the very broad scope. Are the journals open access? What are the fees? What is the time to publication? What are the length or format requirements? You know, you have to consider that, and there can be trade-offs. You can publish in a more traditional journal that is primarily print and does not have an APC. They might have figure charges or page charges, but it may be that you have a very short number of pages. You can only have 3 pages in the journal for your study versus an open access online journal where you can have more length, but you may have to pay a fee. So you have to kind of think about these trade-offs, and they are important components of publication these days. If you have identified a target journal, it really helps to read the papers there. Look at their format. Can my study fit this format? Whether it's the length, whether it's the presentation, whether it's the general information you need to give. So what is the level of introduction I need? I'm going to a diabetes journal. Do I need to explain everything about diabetes versus going to a general interest journal where I might have to talk a little bit more about the background of the paper? And I would suggest you follow the information for submissions. It is very clear that some people just don't bother at all. They write it up and they send it to the journal, and if it gets rejected, they send it to another one. But I have had reviewers who call it out and say, this doesn't look like a science paper, or this doesn't look like a Cell Press paper. And they feel that if they're not targeting it well, what else are they not doing well for their preparation of their paper? Prepare the figures. Most journals these days will publish your figures. There's not a lot of art available in production to help. And prepare a cover letter. So what is the cover letter? For the most part, only editors read the cover letter. Every once in a while, we might send it to a board member if you're making a big claim and we want them to understand to help us assess a paper. This is your chance to sell the paper to the editor. This is the greatest thing since fire was invented, because that's the important thing. Explain the advance. In 2019, Lee et al. Found this gene. We have now investigated this gene, we've knocked it out, and we see this downstream effect, so we can explain how it works in the phenotype, in the knockout, or in the mutant. And why is the paper a good fit for the journal? Don't just tell me it's going to be in the New York Times science section. They publish a lot of stuff that I don't really think is good science. It's more, this is going to be important to other fields. Again, because explain why. Do you have any related works in submission or in review elsewhere? That's important because we need to know what the context is. If you cite a paper that's in submission someplace else, we will ask for a copy of it because we need to be able to assess clearly what the full advance of your study is. You're also going to suggest reviewers. You don't suggest your buddies. You don't suggest your PhD advisor or your trainee. You should pick people who are active in the field, who can truly assess the impact of your study. If you have a multidisciplinary study, it's very good to say, this study requires a reviewer who knows human genetics, who knows diabetes biology, and is familiar with the high C. You know, make sure it's clear. And you can give suggestions for each of those types. But this is really important information to have in your cover letter because it tells me who you think your audience is. And it will help me find reviewers that are in this audience. You can exclude reviewers. I don't need to know why. Probably the most amusing one I got was, you know, this person's a jerk and I don't want to work with them. I don't want them to see my paper. That's fine. Some people are like that. But generally, we only allow 3 exclusions. Don't exclude the entire field. You know, also for your suggested reviewers, you know, don't suggest Craig Venter, Francis Collins, because it's a human genome paper. They're busy and there are other people who are probably going to be better placed to assess it. And I do want to consider, I don't get people who say, reviewers who say, my field is boring. I don't want to see anything published in my field in your journal. What I might get though is this study, this is not a good representation of my field, and I don't think it's worth publishing in this particular journal, and here's why. But competitors will understand the advance, and especially if it is a top journal, they're going to take that to their NIH funders and say, look, they just did this. We're working on the next stage of this, and we're going to be the next one in this journal. Some people, again, are competitors. People are human. So they may not be appropriate for reviewers, and you can exclude them. But do consider who people that you work with, maybe not directly as colleagues, but you talk to at meetings, because you need to know what they're doing and they want to know what you're doing. They are people who want their field to be represented in the literature. So it's important. In terms of putting together your paper, it's a pyramid, and you need to have a wide and deep foundation. This is going to be your data, your figures and your tables. And then you have to figure out, what is the story they tell? So when you're writing it up, you're going to be saying, here are my methods. Here's what I did to get this. Here are my results. And here's what it means. This is the implication. That's going to be the next part. Then you're going to come up with the introduction. What is it that everyone needs to know about this work to understand it? And what is the conclusion? What take-home messages can you make from this? And then you come up with your pithy title and summary that conveys sort of the overview of the paper. Not everyone works this way, but it's really helpful if you think about building your paper in that manner, because you're not going to miss things, and you're going to be able to make sure it's very complete. Wait a second, I just did that one. Oh, no. All right. So in terms of your manuscript, general audiences, general journals are going to need more information. Specialty journals are going to be more focused. Think about the people who are looking at your paper. There's the one who's going to catch the title, think it's interesting, read your abstract, maybe look at figure 1, maybe look at your conclusion. They're not going to read the whole paper. They're just going to kind of skim through it. Versus your competition or your colleagues. They want to know what you did. They want to know you did it right. They want to make sure you dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, because they want to use your data to build upon for their next study. So they're going to be those people reading it. And you've got to make sure that the paper is accessible to both groups. Every line is essential in scientific writing. I'm now an open access journal. We can have a very long format because we're totally online, but that doesn't mean I'm going to give you carte blanche to just run on and, you know, have 10,000 words. If I feel your paper could be shorter, I will tell you so. And you really don't necessarily want me to go in with the equivalent of the red pen, because I edit, and I edit quite stringently, and I've been complimented on my scorched earth editing technique. So you really want to make sure it's as tight as possible. So one major idea per sentence, one major concept per paragraph. Keep them short. Think about readability. Just because it's a complex topic doesn't mean that it has to be presented in a complex manner. And use citations wisely. Lots of journals have citation limits for different types of papers. Figures should support the text, make sure they're clear, make sure that everything is explained. If you have a red and a blue square on your figure, explain what the red means, what it connotates, what the blue is. Don't expect people to take it immediately. You know, some people think in different ways. It may be obvious to one person, it's not necessarily obvious to everyone. Prepare your paper like a talk. Again, who's your audience? Are you giving it to a department? Are you giving it to a section head? Are you giving it at a meeting? What is the necessary information for the introduction to give? What are the questions being asked? What is the appropriate background? Give the methods, what you did. Very briefly, you can refer to an online or supplemental materials if necessary. What are the results? What are your conclusions? And explain how your findings advance the field. I get very descriptive papers. Genomics tends to be very descriptive. So if you've got a great new data set, why will people care about this data set? It's important to say so. If the reviewers don't agree with you, they will let you know. And any necessary caveats. So Press has a limitations of the study that you write at the end of every manuscript. We ask for it towards the end of the revision process, but if you put it in before it goes to review, that's not a problem. So what happens once a paper gets submitted? Well, it gets assigned to an editor. Depending on the journal, it may be sent to a board member. So at Science, lots of papers went to board members. At Cell Genomics, we only use the board members if we're really trying to decide, we're not sure about this paper and the advance it represents. Can we get an expert opinion? Paper gets assessed by an editor, generally gets read at least once very carefully. We write up a little paragraph about why we like the paper, why we don't like the paper, what the benefits, what the cons are. We assess it to other papers we've looked at recently, whether in our journal or available online and various other journals. If we decide it's going to go to review, we will try to get 2 to 4 reviewers. Generally, we ask for 2 weeks. Our goal at Cell Genomics is for papers to go from submission to getting the reviews back to you within 2 months. I can't promise that 100% because I'm working with external people, but I do bug them the heck if they start getting late. So they get lots of nasty emails from me. Well, maybe not so nasty initially, but towards the end, yes. You know, we are trying to be an advocate for the author. It doesn't mean I'm going to accept your paper, but I'm going to work hard to get you information you need as soon as possible. We will assess the quality and the context of the reviews. We may need to bring in a second or a third or fourth reviewer if we feel that some topic is not being met. Sometimes you pick people and you think they'd be really good and they say, oh, I only assessed this part of the paper. And you're like, well, I really need this part assessed. And you know, it's 3 weeks in. I will let you know as an author if that's going to happen. But we want to make sure the papers are assessed as fully as we can. We look for things like consensus among the reviewers. You know, people always say, well, if you get 1 thumbs down among 3 reviewers, it's not going to get published. That is not true. We're looking for the reviewer that can make the best argument. I want to see excitement about the paper. I want to see interest in it. Sometimes there are technical details that need to be worked out, and a reviewer can be like, this technical problem is really bad. I don't recommend acceptance. But if the author feels that they can address it through discussions post-review, we sometimes will allow them to revise it. And we will ask the reviewer to look at it again. And often the authors really do a good job and the reviewer is quite impressed. I've seen that many, many times. So, you know, it's not just looking at the negative review. I'm looking for people who say, this is potentially really exciting, even if they're not quite there yet. And I communicate with you. I will give you the reviews. Sometimes I will ask for a point by point before I make a decision on the basis of the reviews, especially if they're mixed. I will say, what can you do to address these reviews? If we ask the paper to be revised, as an editor, I will arrange for re-review. At this point, we're looking for technical details. We're not looking for the general context. So reviewer may think that, you know, this is incremental relative to the advance. If we send it back to revision, we basically feel that the advance is enough for our journal. And at that point, we're just looking to make sure that all the validation is done and that the data are supporting their conclusions. And as an editor, I will help you guide the final revision. Again, sometimes I will go in and I will edit the paper if I really feel like it needs a lot of work, or I will provide guidelines in terms of formatting it for the final version, or helping you with issues. So Cell Press has a nice advantage of being an all science publisher. I put this in because things are growing and changing, and I just want people to be aware that besides having Cell, which is primarily a life science journal, we do have other journals that are involved in the physical sciences. We have Chem and Joule and Matter. And as of 2020, Med has joined the team, and we also have Cell Reports Medicine. So we do have medically and clinically focused journals. And then Cell Genomics came in 2021, and we just launched a sustainability journal that's going to be available soon. I don't think they're publishing yet, but soon. And one of the things that Cell Press offers is called community review. And the idea is you can submit your paper and you can say, these are the journals I would like this paper to be considered for. And it can be up as high as Cell, and it can go all the way down to iScience. And editors from these journals that you have targeted. So let's say you've got a single cell sequencing of a brain, and you say, I think that this might be of interest to Cell. I think it might be interested to Neuron. It might be of interest to Cell Genomics or Cell Reports or iScience. You can target those journals. Editors will be brought in to assess the paper. And the advantage of this is it gives you a relatively quick review process at multiple journals, where we can talk about the difference between a cell genomics paper, which might be more descriptive, versus a paper at Neuron if Cell has passed on it. And we will talk about who to get to review and what is necessary for the review process. And it helps give you a home in a much quicker manner than it might if you submit to one journal and it gets rejected and passed on to another. And the idea is to kind of cut the process down. Doesn't always mean that your top choice journal is going to be the one that it succeeds at. But I've been involved with this. We've had several papers come through community review to Cell Genomics, and they've done quite well. And people have been happy with the process. And I've had papers that, unfortunately, none of the top journals that they wanted targeted were interested in the paper, and they were unhappy. So it doesn't mean your paper is necessarily going to get published, but we're going to try and find it a home in Cell Press. And community review is one way you can say, here's where I'd like to see how my paper succeeds or not. Okay, post-decision. After acceptance, you can pop the champagne. Paper gets scheduled. We arrange for online release, may arrange for news or a preview or a perspective. And we will choose the cover images. If you have a particularly visual figure or something that you would like to design and send it in, please feel free. We have a pool of different cover images. We vote among the editors, and make a decision on the basis. We also consider things like if you have a paper on a bird, if we had an organism the week before or the month before, we may not choose that cover. We try to mix it up a little bit. But there are lots of different potential ways to visualize your data or your study. The harder part is after rejection. Okay, we are sorry, we are not going to pursue your paper. Read the reviews, read the letter, don't pick up the phone. Don't send off that nasty email. You can write it if it really makes you feel better, but don't send it. Wait, give it a night, sleep on it, then read them again. If you are convinced a mistake has been made, and this is not a decision on the level of the advance, we disagree with the reviewer's assessment of this not being enough of an advance, that's not a mistake. However, the reviewer has said, we did this wrong, we did the statistical test wrong, we did it right. They don't understand the statistical analysis we did. Let us know. We will reconsider. It always helps if you feel like you could add extra data and to send a point-by-point response to the editor. We do take these seriously. It does take time though, so it doesn't mean we're going to be able to get back to you tomorrow, whether or not we're going to reactivate the paper. But again, if you really feel like there's been a mistake, it is okay to contact the editor. Be polite and don't expect necessarily that your paper is going to advance at this particular journal. Another thing at Cell Press is we often will try to facilitate or suggest transfer to a different journal if we feel it's appropriate. So if your paper has science in it, if it really advances something, we will try to direct you to the appropriate target for the current version. That doesn't mean necessarily that there's not going to be any revision, but we will try to find you a target and put you in touch, hopefully, with an editor if you need help in terms of what would I need to do to get this published. I will also say, don't take it personally. Working at journals, there are so many different scientific papers. I can't handle them all. As much as I'd love to read them all, I would never sleep. Peer review is subjective. It does not reflect upon you or your research. And sometimes we have to turn away papers and we can't tell you that we have another paper coming out that basically scoops you. So we will just tell you, you need to take it elsewhere. So do keep those things in mind. We have to make a lot of decisions. Even sort of the low impact factor or competitive journals are turning away over 50% of their papers pre-review. So we do have to make decisions, and just because we didn't pick yours doesn't mean necessarily it has anything to do with your paper. It may not fit the perceived scope of the journal, or there may be something about the paper that we feel is just not appropriate. It is okay to contact the editor for further input. There's not much more we can say besides we're sorry, but just relative to the other papers we've reviewed recently, we just didn't feel that this was appropriate for our journal. That's probably going to be the majority of our responses, but sometimes we can give you a little bit more specific input about why we are not going forward. Can't always. This is time consuming again. It will sit in my letters queue until I have time to get to it. If you are requesting reconsideration, starting the letter, "Dear Bonehead," doesn't work very well. Be nice, keep it to the science. Where are the reviews incorrect? Again, provide a point-by-point response and anything else you can add. But ultimately, you may want to be considering where you're going to resubmit next. And if a reviewer has raised criticism and you're going to a similar target journal, you should probably address it before you resubmit elsewhere, because the same reviewers could be invited. That happens a lot. Or a different reviewer can come up with the same issue. So again, at Cell Press, we're trying to find a home for all journals. So we will discuss with other journals. Sometimes it gets to the point where we will waive any APC, any charge for article processing. Sometimes it is we will guarantee review if we're not reviewing a paper, or we will guarantee acceptance as long as they address the concerns through the text. So we can give you information about what you would need to transfer to another journal. And there are lots of lateral transfers too. I have papers from Neuron that I've gotten transferred, and Cancer Cell, and vice versa. We have papers that we feel like this is just a little too specialized for a genomics journal. They do some single cell sequencing, but we feel like a different journal would be more appropriate, and we will reach out to the other journal editors. Okay, I'm going to change topic a little bit here. So if you guys are staying in science, as soon as probably you publish your first paper, sometimes even before, you will probably get a very, very impersonal email saying this journal would request you to review this paper, gives the title, maybe the authors. Can you do it? Yes or no? It's not the greatest letter, but the point is, if you are a junior, there is typically a person on the other side of it. It is a really good chance to make a good impression. So if you can do the review, if it is in your field and you feel you can actually assess the paper on the basis of the information you've been given, it can help your career, because while there are professional journal editors like me, occasionally I get asked what I think about certain researchers. The majority of journals are being run by society members. They're being run by academics, and you never know where they're going to show up in your life. They could be on your hiring committee when you're looking for a job. They could be reviewing your grants if you're writing R01s or things like that. So I always recommend for that journal the first time, if you can, to say yes and to do the review and to do a good job. If you feel like you can't, it's fine to say, I'd love to be able to do this, but I'm going out of town for 2 weeks, maybe next time. Suggest alternative reviewers. That's always helpful. You do need to respect the confidentiality. You can't walk up to someone and say, oh, I just got a review request and I think you'd be great for it, because you don't know if they've been excluded for whatever reason. Is there a conflict? Whether you're a collaborator, your supervisor trainee, colleague, friend, someone you went to grad school with, competitors, enemies. I can't stand this person. This is not the chance to show them how bad they are. You really got to focus on the research. If you have a financial conflict, a lot of people don't think about this. You own stock in Illumina. This is a long read sequencing technique. If it's right, you could lose money. If you feel like you cannot be conflicted on that, basis, you can accept the review, but you do need to declare that this is a potential conflict. Intellectual, there are two camps, and this is my chance to show that everyone in camp B doesn't know what the heck they're talking about. No, I could be open to the ideas in camp B if they provide the right data. So I would be okay to assess this. I could change my mind if they have the right data. Time frame requested. Typically, we ask for 2 weeks. You know, I think most journals go about a month. Like I said, we try to go from submission to getting the reviews within 2 months. Remember, it does take a week or so to assess the paper, whether or not it's going to go to review initially, and it does take some time to get reviewers. So it doesn't mean that you necessarily have 2 full months to review the paper. If you would like to do it, but you need extra time, let the editor know. I would really like to review this paper. It's right in my sweet spot, but I really need 4 weeks. If I feel like I can't allow that much time, I will say, thank you, I appreciate that, but I'm not interested. Or I can say, yes, I can grant you that extension. Let us know though, don't make us come chasing you. And just remember, again, there's a person reading your reviews and assessing them. It is not computers, it is not impersonal. And it is a good chance to sometimes make people aware that you are a strong thinker in the field. And you, again, you just never know. Science is not that big a society that people don't overlap, especially if you're in the same field. Oh, that's why. Okay. There we go. So what is a good review? What are the reviews you want for your paper? Generally, they have a 1-paragraph synopsis. It can be relatively short, but in this paper, these authors looked at this. They did these experiments, and they come up with this data, this big data set, and they conclude this. That's all it has to be. I recommend this paper be published with major revisions. Here they are, and here are a few minor points. I don't think this paper is publishable because this is fatally flawed. They used the wrong technique, or their data set is much too small, something like that. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So give the reasoning behind why you think the paper should or shouldn't be published. There are often comments to the editor. Occasionally, I will get comments like, I mentioned this to the author. I can't put it in my body of my review because they'll know who I am, and I have to work with this person in the future. But what would be required to make it publishable at this journal, if you feel it can? Is it an incremental advance or not? What is convincing? What's unconvincing? What are the technical points that need to be addressed? And what's conceptually? I think they're not looking at all the hypotheses here, and I think there are alternate hypotheses, such as published in Smith et al. In 2019 or something like that. How does it advance the field or not? Are there similar publications? And again, because give your reasoning. Don't just say, I like this paper to be published. I literally had that. I wrote the reviewer back. I said, could you give me some examples? I like this paper and it should be published. I looked at A, B, C, D. They did this all right. It's a significant advance in the field, and I think it should be published in this journal. That's a fine review, but you have to explain it. The one line doesn't work for us. Come on. Sorry, guys. Okay, it seems to be stuck there. Okay. Last bits are just, editors are here to help. We want to publish the best papers in our journal. We selfishly want our choice among the best papers. When you're talking to an editor, be concise in your communications. Focus on the scientific points. And do keep in mind, there are lots of homes for valid scientific study. Don't hang your hat on just getting into one specific journal because it's the name for your field. There are lots of places. Good papers come in lots of different ways. And often, you don't know what it is until, 10 years down the line that you see what an advance it is. And we don't all have the foresight as editors to be able to make that decision. Just a little bit about cell genomics. We have 3 editors now. And if you're interested in submitting a paper, we have office hours where you can click on our website to meet the editors. Sarah will be up pretty soon. She's not currently on our website, but Jude and myself are available to make appointments. I'm on the West Coast, but I have a 7 a.m. slot if you know someone in Europe who wants to talk along with you. I also have a 6 p.m. slot if someone in China or Australia wants to talk to me, as well as a more civilized 9 a.m. slot. So do feel free to reach out. Do feel free to check out the journal, see the things we're publishing. If you like it, I'd love to see your research. Again, I'm just going to throw this in here about MED, because MED is of clinical interest, and I think some of the people in this audience might be interested in pursuing that. Again, we also have cell reports, medicine. So there are a couple more medically oriented journals in the Cell Press group. And with that, I'll say thank you, and I'll take any questions. And for anyone who's thinking about a career, I'm going to leave that up while I take my questions. Kelly.
So when I did reviews, I'm always like wondering, like, how do they go back to authors? I never feel comfortable putting in, oh, these papers should be accepted, or these papers should not be accepted, because I kind of feel like that in that box is the editor. Like if I say this paper should be accepted, the editor decides no.
Generally, we will make that explanation. It's more often that I get people saying the reviews were really positive, and I'm like, but both reviewers said they don't support publication. And in the comments, yeah. So it's up to you. Some people say I don't suggest whether it should be accepted or not because I think that's the editor's job. I'm happy to do the job, but it is helpful for us to know. If you want to put it in the comments to the editor, that's fine. If you want to put it in the body of the review.
You don't mind, like, if a reviewer said that you accept it and then like not to accept it?
Yeah, because generally you will give other things that need to be addressed. And if they can't address it, I'm not going to accept the paper. And sometimes I'm very clear. Reviewer 1 is very positive. Reviewer 2 is not positive at all. I want you to address reviewer 2's concerns before we'll proceed. As an editor, I'm going to be communicating that information to you. In the back there. Perspectives? No. So a perspective is different in cell versus in science. So perspective and science are generally the equivalent of previews. They're relatively short, sort of explaining a paper and why it's important. In cell genomics, it's more of a comment about the field and some aspect of the field that you feel could be advanced through a change, whether in policy or people identifying issues. So we've had perspectives on things like how to discuss people from underrepresented populations in data sets, people of African descent, and how to refer to them appropriately. That would be sort of a perspective rather than a preview. A preview would be sort of writing up a paper. And if you do review a paper and you think this is really strong and you could say something interesting about it, you can always suggest to write a preview on it. If you have a perspective, I'm more than happy to discuss with you. If they are solicited, we do waive the fee. If they are unsolicited, however, they will be subject to a potential fee. So that's a little bit of an advantage to talking to us about it.
How is the journal starting to talk about AI and for both publication and I'm thinking AI is pretty right?
Yeah. Yes and no. There's still a bit of human assessment. It's the same. So I heard an interview where they're talking about like a science fiction journal that just stopped all submissions because people were writing these horrible stories using AI. At some point, we may want to read the science fiction written by an AI, but at this point, it's not quite there. I don't know about reviewing a paper. I mean, the one thing it could do is look at the statistics, but how many statisticians do you know agree with one another? So, you know, there are different questions about that. You know, it's more the question about people writing up papers that, especially, you know, with these issues that have come up with ChatGPT making up facts. You know, what if it cites a paper that doesn't exist? How am I going to know it doesn't exist unless I check every DOI for every paper that gets cited? That's a problem. We're certainly aware of it and we're discussing it. But that being said, I used AI to generate an image for a webinar I did because I didn't like any of the stock photos that were shown. So. It depends on the journal, different formats. We do have limits. You do have to remember, we do have copy editors. And so they do need to be able to look over your entire paper. So, you know, that's part of the length requirements. And the longer your paper is, the less likely someone is to read all the way through. That being said, if you really need extra citations, especially for a review or something like that, discuss it with the editor.
When you have papers that are, you know, maybe interesting, you like in science, but, you know, maybe not a good fit, or you feel like, you know, how others have acquired these views. But for me, kind of a common things that might change with writing papers more similar, or, you know, spiritually like self-genomics, or kind of doing more, you know, mechanistic or qualitative service, you feel like it's like a common, issue.
I mean, I'm going to kind of step a little bit away from cell genomics and go back to my science history, where, you know, lots of people wanted to get in and we were not interested necessarily in the same thing. So cell genomics, we have a little bit more leeway for novelty, but there's definitely the need for novelty, whether it's point of view. You can reanalyze a data set and find something new about it. Or to add something in the context by adding more data. By adding more people, we can see that population demographics affects this finding, something like that. You know, if you just give me a data set, for example, we generate all the SNPs in, you know, this population, what is it about it that we should care? So if it's a really big data set and you have lots of new SNPs at different allele frequencies that we didn't know about before, that's new. If you replicate African Americans, let's say, you replicate a study in African Americans that was done in European Americans, what can you say about it that makes it novel? Just saying, here's a data set of African Americans, it's not going to be enough. You really need to explain. And that's where the context is most important, both for the introduction and the conclusions. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. You had a question earlier?
I did.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah.
Sometimes think about something that are really crazy, that really end up opening up the field. I always feel that those are really difficult to get to the editors to understand why it's important.
That is definitely when it is worthwhile to set up a call to really explain to us and sell us on the idea. Doesn't mean it's going to make it through. But, you know, if you explain, here's the issue, here's the caveat. I'm not an expert in your field, you know, unless you're looking at Boodaloo, you know, genetics of CMS, you're not going to be able to hit me so that I'm going to understand it to the depth of, you know, what researchers in your field do. But if you explain the problem and you explain the problems and the caveats in terms of getting reviews, I might get more reviewers. I might approach people that I know tend to be more open-minded, even if they're somewhat tangential in the field, to get their assessment. So, you know, we don't have time for every paper to discuss, but if it's something like that, I think it's worthwhile to try and make that time. If you send me an abstract, yes, I will just say submit it or don't. But if you can get me on the phone, if you can find a time where we can talk on the Zoom or something, it may be worth it because I can point out, you know, what I know about the field and then you can help correct any misconceptions I may have going in. All right. Enjoy your pizza.